Welcome and thank you for attending today. This presentation today is about what happens when Medicaid expansion ends. And it's actually a recreation of a presentation that I recently performed in New Orleans. And occasionally when you are presenting, you have to be cognizant of the audience and their sensitivities. And therefore you moderate what it is that you share with the audience. This version is the unfiltered version of that same concept of how do you, as a human service, not-for-profit provider, anticipate that you're going to not only survive but prosper in the years ahead when Medicaid expansion is largely completed. And so during today's presentation, I will go through some of the things that I think have occurred, some of the things that I suspect are in the process of occurring, and what I suspect is most likely to occur during the course of the current administration. Now, in this particular slide deck, I put some of my qualifications to be able to provide you this presentation today. I was the CEO of a large regional nonprofit that had a budget annually of over $200 million and employed several thousand people. Prior to that, I was the chief operating officer for an organization called Services for the Underserved, based out of Manhattan, operating in the New York City metro area. I'm a licensed and board certified behavior analyst, as well as a licensed school administrator, both of those in the state of New York. I have been a professor at the Seton Hall University Graduate School of Psychology, teaching, what else? Behavior modification. And last but not least, I attended as part of my master's degree in counseling at the University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business. So what are you going to hear today? Well, a few things. What are the basic requirements for launching a new line of business? How can you leverage your existing services to support alternative revenue streams? Why is data and documentation important? And understand what is your current capacity to track the services that you provide. Last but not least, where do I believe that expansion opportunities exist and how can you take advantage of them? A brief overview of those 10 items that I mentioned. First of all, baseline is important for everybody. Any organization needs to do an inventory of where they are, the services that they provide, the quality, the consumer feedback. So although I believe that cuts to Medicaid are unlikely, I do believe that expansion is going to be extremely limited. The landscape is shifting, and if you don't plan ahead, you'll be affected by what happens, probably in a negative way. Now, many organizations I've spoken to in the past couple of years realize the need to diversify their revenue. However, I will say that it is extremely rare in my experience that these organizations are willing to dedicate the staff, the time, the capital, and the long-term support that is needed to build sustainable revenue-generating ventures. And here I would like to use the example of Apple's founder, Steve Jobs. Many of you might recall that Steve Jobs, for a period of time, was actually fired by the company. And there was a gentleman by the last name Scully who came in as the new CEO and thought that he could do a better job than Steve Jobs did. And what happened? Well, not good things. And so Mr. Scully was asked to remove himself, and Steve Jobs was brought back in. And this is to my point. When Steve Jobs came back in, he figured out very quickly that the company was in trouble and needed new ideas, new innovations, and new products. And he set up a building roughly 3 miles away from the corporate headquarters of Apple that was nicknamed Skunk Works. And it was in that building that the iPod and ultimately the Mac were created, which turned around the company to a level that you see today. I believe it's either the largest or certainly one of the largest companies. And when asked why did he do that, Steve Jobs basically said, look, the culture that was failing was not about to be the culture that would help Apple turn itself around. I wanted people to be independent of that prior history of conditioning so they could be creative and productive. And I would suggest to you today, if you're listening to this as a nonprofit executive, that probably is something you need to strongly consider. So be prepared to invest. This will require time, talent, and capital for you to engage in any of these 10 lines of business that I'm about to go through. So here's the slide that you've been waiting for me to bring up to you. 10 alternate streams of revenue that I'd like you to consider for your organization. The first one is applied behavior analysis. services for autism and other populations with behavioral support needs. Number 2 is a federally funded program called the Ability One program, which is government contracting opportunities, and those are opportunities for people who are disabled for the work. There is also a group called SUPRA, which is the State Youth Procurement Organization that is active in 27 states. The third revenue stream I'd like to speak a little bit about is school district partnerships, tutoring, charter schools, etc., and I'll just lump them under educational services. Number 4 is something that I learned a great deal about at Services for the Underserved in New York City. I don't think there was a single year that I was there that we generated less than $1 million in net profit off of what were known as developer fees. So I'll go into that program a little bit, talk about how it's structured. And then there is the federal supply schedule, and I'll give some specific examples. When I was the CEO of Chimes International Limited, there was no nonprofit engaged in the federal supply schedule. So it's complex to enter, but if I told you the sheer volume of what goes out every week in the FSS, Federal Supply Schedule listing, it would blow your mind. Next, Veterans Affairs contracts. This was something I became familiar with while at Services for the Underserved, a program called HUD-VASH, which was just one of many opportunities available through the VA. Number 7, the sale of online information and courses. I'll provide one specific example about a course in the field that I'm currently in as a behavior analyst, but there are many others. Number 8, what I call proprietary systems of support, and I'll review particularly the area of mentoring and tutoring. Number 9, proprietary retail models, and one of my favorite programs I've ever encountered. If you've never looked up the website Popcorn for the People, it's a company that uses persons who have autistic spectrum disorder to both manufacture and distribute high-quality flavored popcorns. And last but not least that I list here, which I think ultimately will become the largest funding stream of new opportunities, is workforce development and social enterprise. And I'll get into that a little bit further on. But for now, let's touch base on an essential, which is the fact that you have to have records. Originally, this presentation was sponsored by a software company that I know and love, but it got me thinking, if you are out there today and you are delivering a service and charging for it, you better have an audit trail that can demonstrate that you provided a benefit or an outcome consistent with what you were contracted for. If you don't, I think you're in trouble because we live in an age of clawback. So if you are out there providing any of the services that I mentioned above, I believe it's well worth your time and effort to explore what are state-of-the-art electronic records that can support your organization both in its billing and documentation for services rendered. And with that, let me get into opportunity number 1, applied behavior analysis. Now, this is a proven and expanding opportunity in the healthcare arena. For years, the U.S. Surgeon General recognized applied behavior analysis as the only effective treatment for autism. And in the day that that was posted to their site, it used to say, demonstrated by more than 50 years of research. Well, that 50 years is now more like 75 years or 70 years. A few things make this an opportunity that's staring us all in the face. The first is that I had a conversation, I'm going to say probably right before the pandemic, with Congressman Chris Smith, who I've known for many, many years, a Republican from New Jersey, and who is one of the co-chairs of the Congressional Autism Committee. And in our conversation, we both remembered the same researcher, Dr. Rutter, who in the 80s said that the incidence of autism was 1 in every 10,000 children. And we both looked at each other and said, well, how do we go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 32 tonight, and 1 in 29 in his home state and my home state of New Jersey? How did we go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 29? And how did we get there when the definition in the DSM-3, now the DSM-4 and 5, how did we change the definition to eliminate some of the higher functioning kids with Asperger's and high functioning autism and still arrive at 1 in 32? Extrapolating from the number of 1 in 32 against the school-age population in the United States, there are currently 11 million children affected nationwide. Why does this matter? Well, the need for treatment services, particularly ABA, which is now a mainstream part of the healthcare industry because it's reimbursed by almost all insurance companies and by Medicaid. requires that there's many, many more needed children in need and families in need than there are providers. So the opportunity aligns with the mission of most not-for-profits, creates a billable service, and unfortunately addresses a national crisis and provides a sustainable stream of revenue. All 50 states now require that commercial insurances must cover treatment for ABA for children from 0 to 21. This will create and has created a consistent funding stream. Now that said, true quality in ABA services is like anything else, any other medical service. I use the example of a parent who finds out they get a diagnosis of their child that they're very sick. And God forbid that parent hears your child has an issue in their brain that needs surgery. Was there ever a parent out there who said, well, can you tell me who's the third or fourth best surgeon to do the surgery on my kid? No, what's the question that's always asked? Who's the best? Well, the best are few and far between always in any field. However, that's how you will differentiate your organization. Can you establish an ABA unit within your agency? That's an internal assessment that's probably going to be best done by somebody from the outside. But here I want to bring in an example of quality that I personally experienced with the Dr. Vincent Carbone and his wife Suzanne. They had just opened up a clinic in the Hudson Valley area of New York, and Suzanne was the manager of the clinic. And Dr. Carbone is impeccable in his treatment of young children, particularly young children who are selectively mute, which happens, unfortunately, far too often with autism. And she received a call from someone who identified themselves as working with the Prince of the Emirate of Dubai. And she explained to the gentleman that she appreciated the call, but that Dr. Carbone was a US-based practitioner, behavior analyst, and he wasn't going anywhere. And this gentleman said, well, would you hold on? The Crown Prince would like to speak with you. And the story was being told over dinner up in Boston at ABA International. And the Prince got on and said that he had a family member who was affected by autism. And did Mrs. Dr. Carbone understand that there was no amount that she would ask for in a check that wouldn't be forthcoming? That then resulted in the royal family flying their jet to Newark Airport, parking off to the side of the airport, and for a couple of years, receiving treatment on the plane. Ultimately, I imagine the same individual from the Emirate of Dubai made Dr. Carbone an offer, and today if you look up his clinic, you will note that his clinic is in the Emirate of Dubai, as well as I believe he has one in London. So that's where quality can take you when you get that reputation. You're going to need a concrete business analysis, and I strongly suggest that come from the outside for the very issue that I mentioned that Steve Jobs ran into. Insider is going to have a very difficult time being unbiased. Second, you're going to need a tactical plan for implementation and be committed both to compliance and to quality at the highest level. So a caution flag here from my own experience. And again, I'm going a little bit deeper on this particular item than I will on the other 9 for the purposes that you may walk away from here and start movement on this item itself. Don't try to simply add on the ABA function in your organization. Tacking it on to existing staff workloads is almost guaranteed to fail. This is a specialized, high-stakes field. I found that out the hard way myself. I had a highly competent woman who was running a state division for me while I was down at Chimes, and I simply asked her if she would be willing to implement an ABA program within her sphere of control. And big surprise, I didn't give her the resources, I didn't give her the additional consideration, we didn't identify a program champion, and it died on the vine about 1.5 years later. So I start off by saying find a star, cultivate a champion for this program. Successful programs are very often, almost always, driven by a passionate, well-qualified, well-known, well-respected leader. Examples of industry pioneers, I mentioned Dr. Vincent Carbone. I've had the opportunity to work with him. Dr. Saul Axelrod, one of the founders of the field at Temple University, and I was blessed to work with the recently deceased, brilliant Dr. Brian Iwata, who set up Kennedy Krieger Institute. These are superstars. They never ever had to look for clients. Who can you find that's a superstar that you can associate with your program? If you don't know a lot about ABA, I will suggest a few resources. One, JABA, the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. Take a look, read some articles, everything from traffic pattern control in Canada to smoking cessation to corporate use of applied behavior analysis to reduce risk from accidents and injuries. It's a big field. There's also ABA International, which is an international association of BCBAs and doctoral level behavior analysts. If you would like to look at successful fundraising, look at the New England Children's Center and what has been done up there relative to fundraising. Sometimes they get more than $1 million a year of unrestricted funding based upon their reputation for quality. And last but not least, take a look at the Kennedy Krieger Center, founded by Dr. Brian Iwata, which has waiting lists for parents of children with special needs from around the world. A closing thought here based on a true story. A few weeks ago, a friend, associate, and behavior analyst peer had me down to his house for a Cuban cigar, a genuine Cuban cigar. And as we were sitting there, he basically indicated that he had to call it an early night because the following day, he was going to Delaware to look at buying an airline. And I looked at him and I said, wait a minute, let me get this right. You're going from treating autism to making so much money that you're about to entertain buying an airline. And he said, yeah, he had to do that because he was getting slaughtered on taxes because he was making so much cash. That's just an idea of the potential in this field, ABA. So here I present a graphic, how to start your ABA business line. Build the right team is box number 1 I've already hinted to. Hire or partner with at least one key staff, a board-certified behavior analyst. Better yet, find multiple BCBAs because the demand far exceeds the supply. Number 2, use a strong electronic record system. I've personally been in a situation where 2 parents were getting divorced after we had provided early intervention to their child in Westchester County, New York. And we got a subpoena for records. Thank God we had those records. It would have been very uncomfortable had we not. Invest in an advanced EHR that has built-in AI capacities. Artificial intelligence is not coming. It's here. So make sure that when you're purchasing an EHR or an ER, that it's got AI built into it. Set up a solid billing infrastructure. Many organizations want to get into the ABA area, but they don't know what they're doing relative to coding, billing reconciliation, and collection. It'll kill you. Find a billing expert who has coding knowledge and experience with Medicaid and insurance claims. Diversify your revenue streams. It doesn't always have to be one source for one service. Perhaps you'll mix private pay with insurance reimbursement. Perhaps you'll work with government contracts such as schools or school districts that outsource applied behavior analysis. Or maybe you'll do a combination of these and many other creative ways to draw revenue into your company. So, number 2, as I was putting this presentation, I thought to myself, what in my experience of 40 years in the field of human services has generated the greatest amount of unrestricted capital or cash? And by far, the answer is the Federal Ability One program. Now, up until about 2010, I had never heard of Ability One. And yet Ability One was a program that was created after World War I for soldiers who were injured in theater. And it uses a term, disabled for the work. If you look back at the origins of the program almost 100 years ago, those were individuals who had traumatic brain injury, who had lost limbs, and needed some special accommodations to be able to be employed. Well, fast forward, I landed Chimes. And we made significant unrestricted revenue from a program that employed 950 individuals who were disabled for the work. In the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2021, we generated over $15 million in unrestricted surplus, even after covering the Medicaid losses that we had on states whose compensation for the services that we rendered was simply inadequate. And here I would say probably Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia were the 3 biggest. I know that Delaware did an assessment where they were only paying 67 cents on the dollar of what it costs for us to deliver residential services. The critical success factor again here is these are federal contracting opportunities. The expectation is that you're going to have records that support the services that you've delivered and the deliverables required by the contracts are met. Every service line will require robust documentation. We did a number of different things, from logistics for the United States Coast Guard Service to janitorial and maintenance, some of them at the highest levels at the Pentagon, Fort Bragg, Aberdeen Proving Grounds, landscaping and maintenance, snow removal. I keep coming back though to data. You have to be audit ready. And this is interesting to me because the movement within the Ability One program is to a person-centered planning model, which if you are an individual that is working in the developmental disability space, we've been doing that for 20, 30 years. But it's new to a lot of providers, which in my mind creates a lot of opportunities. So as I said at the beginning of this Ability One option, this was by far the best funding option available. What is it? It's a federal set-aside program supporting individuals with significant disabilities. It currently is funded at about the $4 billion level with commitments by major funders, including the Department of Defense, the General Service Administration, and other federal organizations to double the size of that program within the next 4 years. The key requirements, and here's why it's a nonprofit stream, you have to be a 501c3 nonprofit to get into the program, and you have to employ, the majority of your contract employees have to be individuals with significant disabilities who are disabled for the work. Now, I mentioned that I think this provides opportunities. Well, part of the thing that happened in the last 10 years was the Ability One program, which is operated by two brokers. One is National Institutes for the Blind, for individuals who are visually impaired, and the other one is now known as Source America, formerly known as National Institute for the Severely Handicapped. They have an issue, Source America, and that issue is that they used to have about 650 provider organizations that were nonprofits. That has dropped down to about 400. And keep in mind what I said, there is commitments to double the size of the program in the next 4 to 5 years. So Source America is not stupid. They figured out, look, we don't have enough inventory to provide service contractors to support a doubling in the size of the program. We've actually lost 1/3 of our membership. So what can we do? Well, they created some new opportunities, something called the Mentor Protege organizations. And this will allow those who are not in the program to enroll within Source America and to work with another provider who is currently providing these services. It's a little bit more involved than I want to get into the detail of here, but needless to say, this creates partnering opportunities, and I suggested a hyperlink here for Pershing St. Pete's, a gentleman by the name of Jerry Cotter, who's a retired colonel, who at one point, when I asked him, well, what was your biggest job with the Army? He said, well, I ran fuel for NATO. He is an expert in federal procurement, and if you want deep dive details, please reach out to him via his website. Related opportunities are the state level set-aside contracts, some of which are under the SUPRA program, State Use Procurement. Virginia has its own system, but these are not insignificant opportunities. For example, in the state of New York, the budget for NYSID, New York State Industries for the Disabled, is over $1 billion a year. Then there are also county and municipal contracts. And here I'm going to give the example of a friend, Stephen Coons, the president of FedCap that operates in New York. He had a great model. He basically would get a new contract, and here I'm going to pull from my memory that he obtained a contract at Naval Weapons Station Earl on the New Jersey shore, and then turned around and asked his directors to make contact with the county administration, which happened to be in Freehold. And now they currently provide janitorial and maintenance services in the county courthouse. From there, they reached out to local school districts and asked the question, well, do you have kids graduating who otherwise might not be employed? If you could put them on a set-aside contract for maintenance of your school, we will employ them, and we will have neurotypical folks supervising them, and we will meet the same contract requirements you currently have, but employ as many of your graduating students as we can. These are what I would call proprietary service models, but if you think about it, it's highly appealing to a school district to employ some of their own kids that they already know. Beyond the federal contracts, those local partnerships, particularly for this organization that I mentioned, have become incredibly valuable, as well as for the political contacts that it has helped the organization to develop to support the set-aside contracting business at the state and local level. The third opportunity I present here is educational services. Did you know that we spend $1.6 trillion every year on K through 12 education in the United States? That is a massive funding stream that is typically overlooked by human service organizations. So why pay attention? Well, despite decades of increased investment, our outcomes as a nation consistently decline against the other developed nations of the world. This creates opportunity for innovation, alternate models, and support services. For those of you who can remember, during COVID, it was the teachers' unions that pressured the closure of public schools. So now you have children graduating who are competing with their peers for entry into work and colleges who've lost 2 years of their education in comparison to those students attending private or parochial schools. This creates an opportunity, whether that is through charter schools or understanding your state's approval process, both for charter schools and for parental vouchers for homeschooling and instruction. The population of children being homeschooled has increased by over 1 million children over pre-COVID as a baseline. During COVID, it increased substantially more than that, but it has held constant at over 1 million new children in homeschooling. So under educational services, I picked 5 different opportunities that I think that would serve your organization well. One is supporting students who are placed out of state by helping to repatriate them into their own home school district or simply back into the state. When a student is sent out of state, it becomes a 100% state and municipal funded student. Whereas opposed to that, when the child is in state, 50-50, federal and state match. Special education services and supports for those students that are on homeschooling or who have behavioral challenges. Can you create that ABA unit and help support kids on homeschooling who might need to have their behavior shaped up? Or can you similarly push in occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy, psychological services, or nursing? And this one I particularly enjoy. Those of us who've been in residential services for many, many years, we run a lot of vehicles, a lot of cars, a lot of vans. Well, how is your district providing student transportation? Don't you have qualified drivers and know how to purchase equipment and maintain equipment? Yes, you do. So can you compete and bid for some of those student transportation services? Finally, it was based upon a presentation that I saw from Wood Services out of Langhorne, Pennsylvania, integrated health supports, such as school-based health clinics. These are different ideas that are coming to fruition throughout the country. Can you get on board and be a part of it? Number 4, using your 501c3 for property development. I mentioned this before at the screen with the 10 opportunities. Your nonprofit status is a tax status, not a business model. However, you can use it to help generate some money. As an example, at Services for the Underserved, we had many, many projects throughout the city of New York, Harlem, Brooklyn, Bronx, Queens, that generated millions and millions of dollars in developer fees. And how did this work? Well, you have to research tax credit housing for affordable housing developments in your region and understand how the basics of this program work. Out of the gate, build the right team. Find a CPA familiar with this subject. Find an attorney who is versed in nonprofit housing law and an architect or general contractor who can help you to oversee these projects. And with this team, find an experienced developer who is familiar with the low-income housing tax credits. Local zoning and compliance issues will have a lot to do with whether or not this works in your area. For example, it worked very well in New York City where the need was tremendous and the rates for the development of property was very high, not so much when I got to Baltimore. And there was a myriad of reasons, but the demand was simply not there. Step 3, be patient. If you need proof, go take a look at the 990 forms for Services for the Underserved and the assets of the corporation. That company, I remember being there when one of the tax credit housing deals that had been set up years and years earlier was turned over to the organization for $1 when the bond financing period ended. Can you imagine obtaining 100 units of housing in Manhattan for $1 and what that would do to your balance sheet? Good stuff. Number 5, federal supply schedule, I mentioned briefly. Chimes was the first nonprofit in. There are thousands of opportunities every week. I think it would stun you to see it. Can you do staff training? That's often on there. We ended up picking several NAICS codes, or NAICS codes, among which was laundry. And I'll use the example of how that worked for us. The reason we picked laundry was that Colonel Cotter, who was working with us at the time, had experience in the Army doing laundry for troops. Well, when COVID broke out, you had this situation where the military needed to clean what they considered hot uniforms or hot medical uniforms. And they needed that done, and they needed it returned sanitized in a vehicle that was also sanitized. And we looked for a subcontractor that could meet these criteria, and the net result was at the end of the first year of running these contracts, we netted $600,000 because we were on the federal supply schedule. It's a more complex conversation, but certainly one worth having. The United States Department of Veterans Affairs, VA contracts. The VA has a $370 billion budget. That's a 10% increase from 2024. Significant resources are now being directed towards community-based care to cut down on the waiting lists that are taking place with the VA. My personal experience was working a program called HUD-VASH, HUD typically being associated with housing. This was a three-legged stool, supported housing and case management for homeless veterans. Our contract provided for the fact that once we could stabilize these people with a primary care physician, appropriate mental health supports, vocational supports, and housing, we needed only to make a monthly contact. And yet, once those monthly contacts were established and put in place, the contracts were highly lucrative, mission-aligned, and we were able to work with a multitude of human service organizations who never knew we existed. The key, who in your organization is monitoring federal procurement activities? So the next item I want to review is listed here as number 7, online education programs. And an example here is that in 2014, the Behavior Analyst Certification Board realized that there were not enough BCBAs to meet the need of that 10 to 11 million children. Well, they came up with a great idea, technicians, and they created a credential called a Registered Behavior Tech. And my wife and I both basically had gone through the BCBA coursework, and she created an online educational program that met the criteria to become a registered behavior tech to work on a team providing services, clinical treatment services to children with autism. The BCBA would write the plan and tweak the plan, whereas the technicians would implement the plan. And it allowed for a massive expansion. Today, there's 250,000 RBTs. There's still only about 70,000 BCBAs. So her program, the Verbal Behavior Institute, promoted an online training. And an example is listed here with a hyperlink to that training today. It continues to operate and continues to generate profits. And the question here is, this is one example. In your organization, you have areas of expertise that in some cases organizations have been around 100 years. What is your sweet spot? And can you convert that knowledge into a digital course for certification? If you happen to have physicians on staff, can they develop online education programs, physical therapists, occupational therapists, psychologists, that you can put online for a fee with a commercial commerce, and you're the CEO sleeping at night or the COO, and somebody clicks a link and generates revenue for your organization after the one-time upfront expenses. The 8th I called proprietary models. Have you ever heard of Sylvan Learning or Huntington Learning Center? These are for-profit ventures, and they're eating your lunch. Why? Well, how complex is it to deal in the space of mentoring, tutoring, or counseling? Did you realize that the market snapshot is that this is a $35 billion a year industry projected to grow annually at a 26% rate? So where do you begin? Well, how about your own community? The people you serve already trust you. Can you identify gaps in educational supports that you may be able to provide some mentoring, some tutoring, or some supports? You already have the mission-driven trust of these consumers of your services. Do an assessment of your environment. Who are your strategic partners that you could bring some of these services to bear with minimal costs? One of my favorite things that I've ever encountered in the world of not-for-profits, this is doing good well. And I used the example here of the Eagles mascot, Swoop, the eagle. Popcorn for the People was established by 2 physicians who knew that they had a son who might not ever work. So they started off small. They started off actually selling sandwiches in the local mall, and then developed a great idea. Gourmet flavored popcorn, my favorite being chocolate espresso, that is both manufactured by individuals with autism as well as marketed by individuals with autism. And today they've had an impressive impact in the Northeast. They have over $2 million of sales. They have partnered with 7 Broadway theaters. So at intermission, if you see Popcorn for the People, you know where it came from. 2 of the biggest Wall Street investment banks. They have partnerships with the NFL through the Eagles Foundation, as well as through the New Jersey Devils and the NHL. It's a mission-driven employment with a high-demand, healthy consumer product. And they don't rely on government funding, and they have none of the restrictions that come with government funding. So what unique product, service, or experience can your organization bring to market? And finally, number 10, I said this at the beginning, workforce development and Department of Labor contracts, I believe, in the next 5 to 6 years are going to outsize everything else that I've just talked about. Why? Well, if you believe half of the news reporting that says we're bringing $10 trillion worth of new business manufacturing back to this country, my question becomes, where is that workforce? So can you take a look at what's going on with welfare to work initiatives, or the employment requirement being placed upon obtaining and retaining Medicaid? New federal policies will tie eligibility to employment participation. And yet today, from something that I saw the other day that stunned me, for every 5 skilled jobs in areas like carpentry, electricians, welding, we only have 2 people in the current workforce to replace them. And unfortunately, during one of the Bush administrations, the idea of No Child Left Behind got us out of training kids in what I would call hands-on, what Mike Rowe would call dirty jobs. And unfortunately, excuse me, in my area, a vocational school that was deemed one of the best in the state got away from carpentry and welding and auto mechanics. And instead, what did they get into? Theater, makeup, cosmetology. Where are those people going to come from to serve those $5 to $10 trillion of new manufacturing jobs? I would suggest to you that the same person who is going to scrutinize what's coming forth in terms of federal contracting opportunities should highly scrutinize this area of funding. So closing out, how do you sort and select your next venture? Well, start with the basics. And again, I recommend an outside party to help you do this. Where are your strengths and weaknesses? The SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. We reviewed 10 opportunities, and not all of them are for everybody. A word on strategic planning. I'm a strong proponent for using external resources. Why? Well, when I came to Chimes, they had hired some of the best and the brightest in the world to do their strategic plans. And they did them every 3 to 5 years. And I looked at the prior 3 to 5 years, and they all said, pretty much, you're doing great, keep doing the same. But we realized that we had significant structural deficits in our IT. We were still using 5 1/4 floppy inch disks in some of our affiliates. So we pumped the brakes, courtesy of having brought in someone formerly with the Boston Consulting Group, and we decided to build a very vibrant infrastructure around IT. And had we not done that, we never would have survived operating in 7 different states during COVID. So I thank you. Here is my contact information. If you have questions or need further support, I hope you reach out to us, and we look forward to speaking to you.